Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ezra Klein did a debate on Ezra Klein's podcast over their dispute regarding Charlie Kirk and how to handle his legacy, how to speak about his legacy and the things he spoke about after his death. Ezra Klein wrote an op-ed just after Charlie Kirk was murdered, saying things along the lines of he was practicing politics in the right way, that Ezra Klein was envious of what he built politically, the machine, and that he was one of America's best practitioners of persuasion, something to that effect. It was pretty short op-ed, honestly. He got a ton of pushback for it, and notably, as Ta-Nehisi Coates notes in his piece in response, there was no mention of Charlie Kirk's actual words or anything that he actually said. No quotes of his. More so just like a description of what Ezra Klein viewed as his political legacy. And that was the prevailing critique of that piece, is that Ezra Klein focused on a very whitewashed version of Charlie Kirk's legacy, which prompted Ta-Nehisi Coates to write a piece in response that, uses Charlie Kirk's actual words, does not justify his murder or anything that happened to him, but rather places his words into a broader context of historical political violence in America, as well as the context of the things Charlie Kirk was actually saying and how that fits into the historical context of America. So you should read that piece to understand Coates' opinion on Charlie Kirk. That's less so what I'm going to focus on in the clip I show you here, because the main interesting part of the conversation, from what I could see, was more so this strategic conversation of how to win back ground that has been lost, etc. And it's very interesting to see the distinction between Ta-Nehisi Coates' thinking and Ezra Klein's thinking, because in some ways Ta-Nehisi Coates' perspective is a lot more nonchalant than the way Ezra Klein has approached politics ever since Trump won. And it's interesting to hear that perspective. And in some ways, I agree with Ezra Klein's rhetoric. I think it's very clear in this conversation how the political perspectives of these two guys are just fundamentally different. And as I've argued of Ezra Klein in the past, he's just missing something. So that's what I want to get into in regards to this conversation. So check out these couple clips here.
Why are we losing?
We're losing because there are always moments when we lose.
See, that feels very fatalistic to me.
It doesn't feel fatalistic to me. It feels like the truth. I mean, and let me express what I mean. I'm Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm the writer. I'm the individual, right? But I am part of something larger, and I've always felt myself as part of something larger. I have a tradition. I have ancestry, I have heritage. What that means is that I do whatever I do within the time that I have in my life, whatever time I'm gifted with. And much of what I do is built on what other people did before then. And then after that, I leave the struggle where I leave it. And then hopefully it's in a better place. Oftentimes it's not. That's the history, in fact. And then my progeny pick it up and they keep it going. And as horrifying as the feeling is, this moment that we are in, an era of political violence, and I don't want to sound flip here, political violence is the norm for the Black experience in this country. It just is. I don't even mean like the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King variety of it, right? Which is the norm too. You would be hard pressed to have a conversation with a Black person in this country that is a descendant of slavery and not have them be able to reach maybe right here or to tell you themselves, look, my uncle, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, they lived in a small town in Mississippi, in Tennessee, in Alabama. They got into some sort of dispute with a white man, and either they were lynched or we had to run. Political violence runs through us. It is our heritage. Is that good? No. Do we valorize it? Absolutely not. Do we minimize it? Absolutely not. But a life free of it is not a thing that's really in reach in my time.
Sometimes I think that having a historical scope that wide can make the present too deterministic. So to me, I look at the last, 8, 12 years. And what I see having happened is we, the coalition I am in, the things I believe in, lost ground. And people determinedly worked to make that so. Charlie Kirk worked to make that so successfully, right? I think that when he began going to college campuses and putting out a sign at a table, what he was eventually going to build was not obvious, right? I think he worked. I think he was a successful political actor. And I think that from when in 2016, we lost to Donald Trump the first time, very narrowly, won the popular vote, right? And then in 2020, we almost lost to him and began seeing we were losing a bunch of voters we thought we were fighting for, right? Losing more working class voters, losing non-white voters, right? Something was changing, but we won, so okay. And then in 2024, we really got our asses handed to us. And we let a much more dangerous form of politics fully erupt. And I think that reflects strategic decisions they made. I think it reflects decisions we made. So I think for me, it's not enough to say we lost, there are backlashes, sometimes you lose. I think it requires like a very fundamental rethinking, like a disciplined, strategic rethinking of what have we been doing? Why are people preferring this? Rightly or wrongly, like what they took and something that really empowered Trump in the last election was a sense that they didn't. And like we were against them. And if so, they were going to be against us. And I think that's in the end doing politics badly.
So I think two things. I think about how much you argued that like Biden shouldn't run again. What if he doesn't earlier and you have a Democrat who wins the presidency? Like there are other big explainers that I can see for it. You know what I mean? That don't feel so diffuse. The other thing is, and I know you don't want to talk historically, but, when you say fatalism, like I take that to mean that what's the point of fighting? But I think that misapprehends the philosophy here. It's not that you know what's going to happen. It's not that you know Donald Trump is going. It's that you don't underestimate what you are up against.
Yeah, so I relate to what Ta-Nehisi Coates is saying here a lot in terms of you don't really know how things are going to turn out. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen, but you can figure out what your place in things is. And if you look at things from a broad perspective, in terms of historically what's happening, what are the patterns that are happening, then you can understand the role you play and focus on playing your part. And a really interesting moment of this conversation is when Ezra Klein says, I think that when you back out to too wide of a political perspective, that makes it too deterministic, meaning when you're looking at things with a broad view, it seems like certain things are inevitable because those patterns are repeating themselves. And in other words, it could paralyze your immediate political response or strategy to certain situations. And so I get what he's saying there, but also he's just kind of completely ceding the ground of talking about the historical context to all of this stuff, not just why Democrats lost, how Democrats lost in the past. Another thing that Ta-Nehisi Coates said, Ezra Klein asked him about why he thinks that more, a significant portion more black people lean towards Trump in this election. And he says, well, actually, it kind of reverted back to similar proportions from before Obama ran. So in other words, it's more of a correction than some kind of overcorrection or brand new trend in politics, which is an interesting perspective. I hadn't heard that before. And also, Ezra, it seems like he kind of realizes that he's on the wrong end of this conversation as he's giving up this ground of, when you take too broad of a view, that disables your political agency. And again, I kind of get what he's saying there. But my problem with Ezra Klein and others that fill the same space as him is it just has to do with the sort of what appear to be the boundaries of his creative political thought. Because he does have a lot of creative political thoughts. And I think that's why Ezra Klein puts himself out there so much. He does have a creative mind when it comes to this stuff. But one of the things Noam Chomsky talked about, the foundational discovery of his career. If you've ever wondered what about Noam Chomsky actually made him a prominent scholar, it's not any type of political analysis. He was a linguist, and his discovery, among other things, was that language is actually processed by a physical circuitry in the brain. So it's not a function of your neurons to sort of create lists of syllables and words and meanings and definitions that get shuffled, but rather language is formulated by a physical structure that directs those synapses in a certain way. And within that, there is infinite room for creativity. So all different kinds of humans across different places in the world have come up with different languages because that part of their brain developed a different form of language with the other humans around them. But those languages share in common a structure. And so within that structure, there is room for infinite creativity, but it has to fit within those structural boundaries. And he compares that to lots of other things like art, fashion, and even political language and political thought. There's infinite room for creativity within certain boundaries. And my frustration with Ezra Klein, when he asks a question like, why are we losing? And he's reaching for this answer that is going to come from why Republicans are winning. And in that, he ignores all of the arguments that he knows are there when it comes to Gaza and, people who have argued that Democrats aren't left populist enough. And they look at data and they quibble about different individual races and whether that is what is reflected. But on a broad level, if you look at what was surprising about Donald Trump's win, it was the fact that his form of populism, as sort of alarmist and fascistic as it is, was more successful than people thought it would be. And Kamala Harris's moderation and appeal to the sort of norms of American society was a lot less effective than people thought it would be. And so for a lot of people who are looking at this, people who have wanted more firm Democrats for a long time and been loud about it, it is very clear why they're losing, because they're going in the wrong direction and they're abdicating making promises to the people that need to show up to support them. And you could also argue every 4 years, there is 4 years more of people who were old enough to vote for the first time. To write all of those people off as non-voters while they're still trying to figure out what they think. Meanwhile, they perceive Democrats as a do-nothing party that is actively committing a genocide or assisting it. And rather than trying to take an approach of welcoming those people in, welcoming people who want to be progressive, who want to be Democrats into the tent, you instead said, here's the boundary, here's where the big tent stops, and you can either come inside here or you can go away and stay on the outside. And I know Ezra Klein knows this argument because it's made to him all the time. And he sees himself as somebody who has to argue against people who are further left than him. But the boundaries of his imagination are such that he cannot make an argument for what the Democratic Party should do outside of the boundaries of structurally asking something different of the Democratic Party. And Coates even points it out here by saying, you were one of the people saying Biden should drop out earlier. Imagine if he had done that. Forget even dropping out. Say he didn't run, which is something that Ezra Klein was agitating for, and Democrats completely ignored him about. And now that has unfolded into a spectacular loss for the Democrats because they failed to build enough credibility with even their own base to win against one of the worst forces in American politics in recent memory. But rather than analyzing the fact that he was correct, that the Democrats were doing the wrong thing by running Biden again, and yet they refused to listen to him, just as they refused to listen to all of the people who were agitating against the genocide happening in Gaza. People who from the beginning were saying, you don't have to do this. You can stop doing it whenever you want. All of us are implicitly guilty, and what's happening there is a genocide, and so it needs to stop. And Democrats completely ignored all of those points, just as they ignored the idea that it was even possible to suggest to Joe Biden that he shouldn't run again. And it was impossible that they could exercise some force of political capital to make it so that he doesn't, even though they did that later when it was, time to hit the panic button, and turns out it was too late. But in order to criticize that at this point, he would have to be criticizing the actual structures and levers of power in the Democratic Party, and he simply doesn't think that way. His goal is to create the arguments and the political ideas that those structures of power in the Democratic Party can use to win. And that's why Ta-Nehisi Coates, coming from the perspective that he is coming from, is saying all of this is just a result of political forces in America that have been pushing and pulling for a long time. And this is actually not the worst it's been. It's the worst it's been in most of our memory, but also there are aspects of this that many, many people who are usually shut out from even mainstream Democratic conversations have been experiencing some form of this same repression for a long time. It's not necessarily new, but it is a re-emergence of it. And that re-emergence is actually not that surprising when you analyze the behaviors of the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party has engaged in behaviors that historically have turned voters off, whether that be superfluous wars overseas or weird anti-democratic and non-transparent policy and behavior. And Ezra Klein would be a lot more useful to all of us if he was more interested in pointing that out to Democrats, because he has the ability to do that. And he tried with Biden, and he deserves credit for trying that. But now that Democrats have failed spectacularly as a result of their decision not to do that, Ezra Klein can't point back and say, you guys completely failed and spurned your own base, and I remember it because I was there. But instead, he's more interested in suggesting this more right-wing version of policy, because the only way he can imagine winning is the way that he just saw the right wing win. And there's no version of winning that looks different from that. And that's the problem with what we get from some of these establishment Democrats. Speaking of which, there's this shutdown fight that is about to happen. So let me cover that real quick before wrapping it up. So essentially the status of this is that Republicans are trying to pass this budget bill. Democrats are actually exercising a little bit of leverage for once and holding it hostage. So Trump already canceled one meeting, said he was going to meet with them, then decided not to. They still didn't fold, and so now they're meeting again. So Democrats are saying that they want to extend a certain Affordable Care Act tax credit, as well as repealing some of the cuts to healthcare that Republicans recently made. Republicans are saying, let's pass a stopgap bill to fund the government in the meantime for a few months, and then we'll negotiate that. So Trump has threatened to fire a bunch of federal workers, not furlough them, which is usually what happens, but fire them from the government completely if a shutdown happens. So that's essentially what he's trying to use against them. He's trying to use Democrats' sense of empathy and the fact that they care about federal workers, his federal workers, against them. So that's a bad strategy, and Democrats should not fold to that. And yes, it's true that if a shutdown happens, Trump might fire those federal workers, and that would be bad. And I guess he said to compile a list of federal workers that should be fired, probably people that, would be fired over like certain work that they do. Although the Trump administration has already fired as many of those people as they possibly can, and any that they didn't are still going to be on the short list to get fired at some point in the future. So if Trump wants to fire people in his own government because of a government shutdown that he caused, then let him do it. And yes, they're going to try to blame you, and they're going to try to turn it on you, but this is exactly the opportunity that you guys need to take to use the Republican strategy. Shut down the government, and don't focus on trying to make this technical argument with that, well, Trump, said this, and he is the one who's firing, and then because of this, just say it's Trump's government. he shut it down and he fired his own workers, and that's why he sucks at his job. Just say that over and over and over and over again. Don't overthink it. Don't overcomplicate it. But this is a moment where they actually can exercise some leverage and use it to hold Trump up a little bit. I think they're asking too little when it comes to this bill. This is an opportunity that they could use to significantly cut against the Trump agenda, but using it to try to get repealed some of the cuts that they've made to healthcare, Medicare, and the Affordable Care Act is genuinely a good thing. They're probably going to blink. They're probably going to be intimidated by Trump, and they're going to be what Democrats are always most intimidated by is this idea that there's going to be a huge torrent of bad press. And what they need to do is just embrace it. Just embrace the bad press, be the bad guy, and guess what? You're going to go up in the polls. That's what's going to happen. That's exactly what has happened since the moment Donald Trump stepped on the public stage, is he's willing to be the bad guy and not back down, and people love that shit. People who don't even agree with him love that shit. And Democrats' favorability is in the toilet right now. You guys suck. Everybody thinks you suck. So this is the perfect time to do things that actually exercise your leverage at the risk of being made to look bad in the media. Everything makes you look bad in the media. Just do stuff. Just use your leverage. You can do it. They will back down eventually, and you will end up looking stronger, and that's a much better direction for you guys to go. But because of a lack of imagination, they probably won't.